So, for those of you that didn't end up hearing the news, Mr. Oleksandr Usyk in his next fight will be fighting that of the Dutch kickboxer Rico van der Hoeven, or I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Anyways, that being said, of course, this pretty much created a major uproar within the sport of boxing, and of course, why wouldn't it? At the end of the day, Rico has only had one professional fight, and he has never been a professional boxer except that one professional boxing fight. Of course, Rico has been debatably the best kickboxer of his era. Hell, even some people would debate him as the greatest kickboxer of all time. But of course, this is pretty much looked at as a sham of a fight because people want to see Oleksandr Usyk, who at the moment is still regarded as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport of boxing. People want to see him fight real live contenders. Well, Oleksandr Usyk recently just acclaimed, and he recently just stated who he plans to fight within that of his final 3 fights. And the first one will be that of Mr. Rico, the kickboxer, and the other two may surprise certain people. You may believe that they're good fights, you may believe that they're bad fights, but we're going to go through them right now, and I'm going to give you my personal view. And with these fights, I believe that I will give them a personal fight grade, a letter grade, in order to judge them and to rank them about how good or bad I believe that these fights actually are. And with that, I'm also going to be giving the top 5 opponents that I would like to see Oleksandr Usyk face within that of his final 3 fights. And I'm not going to include that of Mr. Rico because, to be quite honest with you, I don't really consider this a true boxing fight. Although I'm not really going to go after Oleksandr Usyk that much because I understand Oleksandr Usyk is 39 years old. He pretty much has accomplished almost everything that a fighter at those weight classes would want to accomplish. The man has been 3 times undisputed. He basically beat everyone at the cruiserweight division, at least of his era when he was there. He beat the 2 best heavyweights of his era, with AJ Anthony Joshua being 20 plus pounds bigger than him and Tyson Fury being at times 50 plus pounds bigger than him, and on top of that with Tyson Fury having a massive height and reach advantage. Point being is that Oleksandr Usyk has pretty much beat the biggest names of his era, and he could retire today and still be remembered as one of the greatest fighters of all time, if not one of the GOATs of boxing. But the problem is that Oleksandr Usyk isn't necessarily retired. He's 39 years old, and he still remains as one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the world, and in most people's eyes, including myself, he still remains as the debatable #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. And of course, if you're going to be a semi-unified champion of the division, or possibly plan to become completely unified once again within that weight class, you're going to have to fight the best of the best within that weight class. But let's go over and see who Oleksandr Usyk actually plans to fight here, and let's talk about how good these fights are, I believe, and let's talk about the top 5 fights that I would personally love to see Oleksandr Usyk in within that of his final few fights. Let's get into it. So the first fight that we're talking about here, as well as Mr. Oleksandr Usyk, is his next fight against Rico Verhoeven. And I apologize for mispronouncing his name earlier, and if I'm still mispronouncing his name, certainly let me know. This is literally the first time that I'm hearing about this man ever since he got his fight set up against Oleksandr Usyk. Now, I kind of understand why Oleksandr Usyk would want this fight. It isn't really, of course, a major challenge for that of an Oleksandr Usyk, at least more than likely. Sure, everyone has a puncher's chance, but Rico is mainly looked at as one of the best kickboxers of all time. And at least with my conductive research, it appears that Rico is probably debated as the best kickboxer of his era, and many people even tell you that Rico is debatably the best kickboxer of all time. But as we've seen in other fights, whether it be with other kickboxers or other MMA fighters, when they usually make the transition into boxing, especially against high level pound-for-pound level boxers, it usually doesn't end up well for them. Whether it be Francis Ngannou against Tyson Fury or that of an AJ Anthony Joshua, or whether it be a Conor McGregor versus a Floyd Mayweather or other fighters as well. The only exception to the rule that I've usually seen was that of a Francis Ngannou versus a Tyson Fury, and I thought that it was fairly obvious that Tyson Fury didn't take Francis Ngannou anywhere near enough seriously in that fight. But of course, every opinion might differ here. That being stated, what is the personal letter grade that I would give this fight? I have to give this fight at least a C minus. I don't think that it's really that great of a fight, and certain people overall may say, well, I think that this fight is even worse than that. And you could even give it a worse grade than that. But that being stated, I will state that I understand why Oleksandr Usyk is doing this, and I would give it an F if maybe Oleksandr Usyk hadn't fought as many great opponents in his career as what he did. But I'll give the man at least a little bit of a break. The man is 39 years old, and on top of that, he's basically fought almost everyone that he's needed to at this point in time in his career. So I'll cut Oleksandr Usyk at least a little bit of slack, but this definitely is not a fight that anybody really wants to see, and it's definitely not a fight that I want to see. So let's talk about the other two fights that Oleksandr Usyk ended up talking about here. His next fight apparently will be against the winner of the next big up-and-coming title fight between that of Daniel Dubois and Fabio Wardley. Fair enough. I think that everyone really wants to see him fight that of a Fabio Wardley. I think that a lot of people would be highly interested in this fight. But that being stated, if Daniel Dubois does somehow end up winning this fight, I really don't see a lot of people being truly interested within that of a trilogy. And I think Oleksandr Usyk is somewhat smart to actually have his former opponent fight that of the undefeated Fabio Wardley. We've seen certain tactics with fighters do this before, where Canelo Alvarez had Caleb Plant fight that of a David Benavidez, or Mayweather had some of his opponents fight certain opponents in order, if the fight did happen, it made the fight that much more bigger. But if his former opponent actually ended up defeating that new undefeated opponent in the division, it made his win look that much more better, and it made the fight unnecessary. But that being stated, I just don't think a lot of people are truly going to be interested in a Daniel Dubois trilogy. Both fights weren't really that competitive on either occasion, and Oleksandr Usyk, in my view, was able to pretty much dominate and embarrass Daniel Dubois in very easy fashion. So of course, it really depends on which fight ends up happening here. If a Daniel Dubois trilogy actually does end up happening here, I gotta give this fight a B minus. Daniel Dubois, of course, is a A-grade level heavyweight at this current moment in time, in my view, but no one really wants to see a trilogy here. We've already seen those two fights. I just don't see this fight really gaining a whole lot of traction, and to be quite honest with you, I don't think a lot of other people would be super interested in this fight either. But if Fabio Wardley does end up winning this fight, even if he ends up coming behind on the scorecards like what he did against Justice Huni or that of a Joseph Parker, if he somehow ends up winning this fight, which I'm guessing more than likely he'll be the slight favorite heading into this fight, that Fabio Wardley versus Usyk will be a big-time fight. Wardley, in my personal view, is not the most skilled heavyweight that I've ever seen, but that being stated, he still is very talented. He's won every single one of his fights so far, at least on paper, and Fabio Wardley is someone that is looked at as a legit A-grade level fighter who has a great amount of entertainment value behind him, and of course, there's also Oleksandr Usyk fighting yet again another undefeated or top-notch level British heavyweight contender or fighter. So I got to give this fight at the very least A minus or an A. I think I'm going to give this fight an A. I don't think that Fabio Wardley is necessarily the greatest of opponents when it comes down to it, but he still very clearly at this point in time is a A-grade level heavyweight fighter, and if he actually is able to get that victory over Daniel Dubois, this is going to be a fight that a lot of people are going to be looking forward to, including myself. But let's talk about the third and final fight that Oleksandr Usyk says he believes he needs to take or wants to take in the final fight or part of his career. Now, the final and last fight that Oleksandr Usyk said he wants to take in his career is against, quote-unquote, and this is Oleksandr Usyk's own words, Mr. Greedy Belly himself. And of course, the man that he's talking about here is Mr. Tyson Fury. Now, Tyson Fury, of course, at one point in time was regarded as the best all-around heavyweight fighter of his generation. But I don't really think that a lot of people are going to be truly interested in this. There's not really a trilogy that is actually needed here, and I don't think that Oleksandr Usyk really means anything bad by this. I just think that A, that he wants a whole bunch of money, and B, I think that he wants to take fights that are looked at as the biggest legacy fights all around. But the thing that he may not realize is that Tyson Fury and him fighting him is really looked at as a foregone conclusion, or maybe not a foregone conclusion, but basically those fights have already been wrapped up. Oleksandr Usyk, in my view, was able to clearly, although competitively, beat that of a Tyson Fury on both of their occasions, and there's just really no reason to fight him once again. So if a trilogy against that of a Tyson Fury actually did end up getting set up, I would probably give this fight around a B. Yes, it's certainly better than that of a Dana Dubois trilogy, at least if Tyson Fury actually is in somewhat of great form. But to be quite honest with you, with Tyson Fury being out for a little over a year now, and with him also being somewhat around an older age, I really don't even know if Tyson Fury is going to get past his next opponent. I don't believe that Tyson Fury is going to be the same physically or mentally after that of the Oleksandr Usyk fights, and even if he is, who really wants to see this fight in the first place for a third time? It's not like these fights were Riddick Bowe versus Evander Holyfield. Yes, they certainly were competitive, and both fighters ended up having their moments, but I think that it was very clear even from the get-go or the start of the fights that Oleksandr Usyk was just the all-around better man. So now that we kind of talk about that, let's talk about 5 opponents that I would love to see Oleksandr Usyk face, and let's talk about the top 5, and I'll give them a personal letter grade, and you guys let me know if you would enjoy these fights even more. And hopefully, at least in my eyes, hopefully I get to see Oleksandr Usyk take on some of these opponents in the near future. But we'll see what ends up happening. Anyways, let's start off with number 5. At number 5, I'm going to personally state that of an Andrew Ruiz Jr. Now, a lot of people may not want to see this fight whatsoever. This is actually one of the fights that I believe still could be very, very relevant. Although Andrew Ruiz isn't really looked to be quite in as good a form as what he used to be, I still do believe that he is at a very, very good A-grade level form. Although his last performance that I seen him in against that of a Jarrell Big Baby Miller, he certainly did not look the most impressive. In fact, I thought that he even lost that fight, and I think the majority of the boxing world would probably agree with me. But if Oleksandr Usyk's goal is to face that of a decent fighter who was within that of somewhat of good condition, and to fight some of the best champions of his era, I think that Andrew Ruiz would be a pretty good touch-up and a pretty good warm-up before he starts off with the next couple of fights to end off his career. Andrew Ruiz, of course, at his absolute best, was able to beat AJ Anthony Joshua in that first fight. He also was able to get wins over that of an older version of Luis Ortiz, but still a top 10 version of Luis Ortiz. And of course, he also gave Joseph Parker, when they were both undefeated fighters, he gave him a very, very tough fight. And I believe it was to the point to where it was a split decision loss for that of an Andrew Ruiz. The point is that although many people would probably not take a look at this fight as majorly necessary at the current moment in time, this is still a fight that I believe would be very, very interesting. And once again, if Oleksandr Usyk wants to fight one of the older, greater champions of his era, I believe that Andrew Ruiz would be a great place to start. Once again, it's certainly not the best fight in my view that Oleksandr Usyk could take, but it still is a very interesting one, and I still would personally love to see this fight. And Andrew Ruiz is at the bottom portion of his career, or near the end portion of his career, I should say, but he still has that last little left of goodness within him, and I believe that it could be a very interesting fight. A new fighter that Oleksandr Usyk hasn't faced, and also one of the champions that was a part of his era that Usyk has not gotten in the ring with yet. It's just a thought. I don't think that it's necessarily the best fight, but it's a fight that certainly interests me. Let me know what you guys think about it, but I think that this fight would be around a B+ to an A-. It would be very interesting, but it's at number 5 for a reason. Let's now move on to number 4. At number 4, I have that of the up-and-coming British heavyweight sensation, that of a Moses Itauma. Now, this fight would be at absolutely number 1 for me, or it would be at the number 1 spot if I truly believe that this fight had the best chance of happening. But A, I think that Moses Itauma and his manager realize that it's not quite the time yet, and B, that he hasn't really earned a title shot in the first place. And I think that even Moses Itauma has kind of stated in the past that he believes he's a little too inexperienced for that of an Oleksandr Usyk right now. Then on the other side of the coin, Oleksandr Usyk has even stated that he's a little bit too old to fight someone like that of a Moses Itauma. which kind of shows that Oleksandr Usyk, in my view, has a great amount of self-awareness, at least in terms of getting older as an all-around fighter. Oleksandr Usyk is someone that still, in my view, is at a relative prime position, but I don't really know if I would state that he's still at his absolute peak anymore. Oleksandr Usyk is near 40 years old, and he is someone that within that of his past couple of fights has shown a slight amount of slippage. It isn't major, but it is something that is a slight amount noticeable to me, so I do believe that this would be a great fight, but I just don't personally believe that this fight is actually going to happen at the current moment in time. I do hope that I'm wrong, and could you actually imagine if Oleksandr Usyk actually fought Itama at this point in time in his career, and even bigger if he actually was able to pull off the victory, and I'm not even quite sure who would be the betting favorite heading into this fight. It would truly be an amazing fight, and I gotta say, if Usyk actually ends up taking this fight, as well as Itama, you gotta give this fight an A+. I believe that this basically would be the heavyweight version of when Mayweather and Canelo ended up fighting. When Mayweather and Canelo ended up fighting over a decade ago, it was kind of looked at as the old great master versus that of the new and up-and-coming next big thing. And I think a lot of people behind the scenes, although they had Mayweather as a slight betting favorite, they thought that that fight may turn out just like Oscar De La Hoya versus Julio Cesar Chavez, or that of other fights to where the older gun ended up losing to that of the new, fresh, young gun. However, of course, it did not end up turning out that way, and could you imagine if Oleksandr Usyk was actually able to pull off the victory against an Itama? It's a great thought, but of course, that being stated, I just don't think that it's very realistic. But that being stated, I do think that this is a fantastic fight, so I'm going to put it within the top 5 anyway, and I'm going to put it at number 4 with a stellar letter grade of an A+ if it does end up happening. Let's now go on to number 3. At number 3, I have to say Mr. Joseph Parker. Now, Joseph Parker, of course, did end up suffering a loss within that of his last fight by stoppage to that of a Fabio Wardley. But I think a lot of the boxing world, including myself, could very much argue that the fight was at least debatably stopped a little bit too early. Now, for those of you that believe that Fabio Wardley ended up getting the clear stoppage in that fight, that's up to you, and I can definitely see why you would believe that, as Joseph Parker was getting hit up on quite a bit. But I still believe that Joseph Parker was somewhat defending himself, at least within that of the final moments, and he wasn't even knocked down once within the fight. Of course, that doesn't always constitute that you don't need to be stopped within that of the fight, as of course a referee's job is to protect that of the fighter themselves, but this also was a referee that was known for having some of the worst stoppages within that of boxing history. That being stated, I thought that it was very clear that Joseph Parker was clearly winning the fight, even against the much younger Fabio Wardley, or the younger Fabio Wardley, excuse me, because I forget he's actually not as young as what he looks. But Joseph Parker actually had a very good performance. And let's also not forget, he still is probably one of the top 5 heavyweights in the world today. He also recently had wins over Deontay Wilder, the Big Bang Zhang, and also that of Martin Bakole, although Bakole was definitely a little bit compromised in that fight in my personal view. Kind of like the Andy Ruiz fight, I also think that this is a very interesting fight. It's probably not the biggest fight out there, but it certainly would add on another name, another one of the biggest names of his era that he never got his hands on, and also one of the former heavyweight champions, a Joseph Parker who got some decent wins in his career and had a little bit of a revival and a renaissance in this last portion of his career. It certainly isn't the best fight on this list, but I definitely think it's better than the other 2 fights that he was planning on taking, especially if he truly does plan on having a trilogy fight with that of a Daniel Dubois, or Mr. Greedy Belly himself, as he would say, Tyson Fury. I'm going to give this fight personally an A-. I think that Joseph Parker, even in a rematch, could potentially beat that of a Fabio Wardley or someone of a sort. I think that this is a very good matchup, and I would still love to see this fight. But let me know what you guys think on this. I'm going to give this fight an A-. I think that Joseph Parker maybe was slightly affected mentally by the loss of Fabio Wardley, but not too much. I think that Joseph Parker still is at a very good prime form within this fight. So we'll see, once again, what ends up happening. I don't think that this fight is going to happen more than likely, but if it did end up happening, how awesome would that be? But let's now move on to number 2. Number 2 is the man himself, who has been calling out Oleksandr Usyk probably the most as of recently, the undefeated German fighter, Mr. Ajit Kabayel. If anyone is truly the most deserving of a title shot, it is either debatably that of a Fabio Wardley or that of an Ajit Cabello. This man is just the fighter who absolutely could. He has been not the favorite in so many fights in his career, but yet he has always pulled out on top, getting an impressive stoppage in top form in some of them, like against the Chinese fighter Big Bang Zhang, where he ended up getting the stoppage within a dominant 6 rounds, and also to be the first one to defeat that of a Frank Sanchez, completely dominating him throughout the fight. And there's been some other fights where he showed a great amount of boxing ability as well. This would be a very particularly interesting fight. Not only is Ajit Cabello at the moment probably one of the top 5 contenders within that of the heavyweight division, but he's also someone that is undefeated and has a great style to counter that of an Oleksandr Usyk. He brings decent defense, a good jab, and he's also someone that brings constant pressure into the ring. This is a style that maybe could give Oleksandr Usyk some issues, as the last time that we did actually see Oleksandr Usyk have some trouble in the ring was probably against that of a Derek Chisora out of all people, where he pretty much was swarming him like a nest of bees and was basically trying to get him with anything. Now, Cabello, in my view, obviously is a decent amount better than even the best version of Derek Chisora, but it's going to be very interesting to see if Usyk can counter him, and that's exactly why this fight would be very particularly interesting. Either way, however you think this fight would pan out, I think that Cabello is very deserving of a title fight, especially against the man himself, Mr. Oleksandr Usyk. I personally would give this fight an A. I think that this is a great fight. It's not the best fight that probably could happen within that of the weight class, but it still is a great fight nonetheless, and Ajit Cabello, to add on, is extremely deserving of a title shot at this current moment in time. Hopefully we get to see this fight at least potentially, but of course there still is one spot left. Let's move on to number 1. Number 1, I think, has to be that of the British undefeated fighter, Fabio Wardley. I don't think that Fabio Wardley would beat possibly 2 out of 5 names on this list. I certainly wouldn't favor him to beat that of a Moses Itama. I don't know if I would favor him to win against Joseph Parker in a rematch, and I'm not even quite sure if he would beat that of an Ajit Cabello. But one thing I will say about Fabio Wardley is that he has gotten very popular as of recently. He's someone that is very entertaining, and he is a very decent boxer and very talented despite some of his flaws. He can always somehow come back in a fight even if he's clearly down by several rounds or a few rounds within that of a fight. We've seen that against the undefeated Justice Huni, as well as a very great version of Joseph Parker in his most recent fight. And although I thought Parker got stopped a little bit too early in that fight, you got to give Fabio Wardley a lot of credit in the boxing scene right now. And if he actually is able to beat that or knock out that of a Daniel Dubois, it'll make the fight that much more interesting. And I think that right now he probably is the most deserving contender, and Usyk has stated that he believes this fight is very realistic for him next. Either way, I think that this fight is very particularly interesting, so I'm going to give this fight a letter grade of an A. Now, some people may be confused. If I had this at the number 1 spot, why would I only give it an A? Well, in my personal view, Wardley isn't as good as that of a Moses Itama, and I'm not even quite sure if he's quite as good as a peak version of a Joseph Parker or also that of an Ajit Cabello. But it still is a very interesting fight nonetheless, and to be fair, he hasn't been in some of those bigger fights yet, at least against the likes of a Moses Itama, and of course we have to see Daniel Dubois this up-and-coming May, and we'll see if he's actually able to compete with some of the other great contenders like that of an Ajit Cabello, a Filip Pergovic, or some of the other guys. That being stated, I definitely think that this is the fight that most people are looking at next, so that's my personal top 5 list. Those are the letter grades and the rankings that I gave them. Let me know what you personally thought, and what fight would you really want to see Oleksandr Usyk take next, and what are the top 5 to top 3 fights that you would love to see Oleksandr Usyk take next. And certainly, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Anyways, I'm Boxing Realist. That's really about it for now. Pay attention in the near future, as I will be releasing videos more about UFC, boxing, and other topics in sports as well. Always pay attention to see if I'm doing live streams. I'll probably state that within a video. And I'm also going to be doing some live streams of some up-and-coming fights, especially the Tyson Fury card in April, and possibly even the Deontay Wilder and Derek Chisora fight. That's about it for now, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate all the love and support and comments you guys give me. That's about it for now. Peace out, and I'll talk to you all later.